In the gleaming towers of Seattle's tech world, Michael Thompson had mastered the art of living a double life. By day, he was the silent CEO of Summit Technologies, a billion-dollar empire built on innovation and strategic brilliance. By evening, he was just another software developer to his wife Emma, a carefully constructed illusion that protected something far more precious than his corporate success, a love founded on genuine connection. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of breaking through the most meticulously crafted facades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And on one seemingly ordinary dinner night, everything Michael had painstakingly built was about to unravel in ways he could never have anticipated. I suppose you could call me old-fashioned, but I've always believed that respect should be earned, not bought. My name is Michael, and I run one of the largest tech companies in Seattle. Not that my wife Emma knows that. She thinks I'm just another software developer, and I've kept it that way for a reason. But last week, at a dinner with her boss, everything changed. Sometimes the most painful moments in life come from the people closest to us, and watching my wife try to apologize for my simple job to impress her boss. Well, that's a moment I'll never forget. The tech industry is all about appearances, fancy cars, designer suits, and multi-million-dollar homes. But that's never been my style. Even after building Summit Technologies into a billion-dollar company, I still prefer my worn jeans and hoodies. It's probably why Emma fell for me in the first place. We met 3 years ago at a small coffee shop in Pike Place Market. I was working on some code, or at least that's what she thought, when I accidentally knocked my coffee onto her designer suit. Instead of getting angry, she laughed it off, saying she needed an excuse to buy a new one anyway. That's what drew me to her, her ability to find light in any situation, her genuine smile that had nothing to do with status or money. Emma works as a project manager at Vertex Dynamics, one of our smaller competitors. When we started dating, I made a conscious decision not to tell her about my position. I'd seen too many relationships change once people discovered who I really was. The dinners that suddenly became networking opportunities, the casual conversations that turned into business pitches. I wanted none of that with Emma. We got married a year later in a small ceremony. I could have afforded something extravagant. But Emma loved the intimacy of a backyard wedding. She never questioned why I could afford our beautiful lake house on what she thought was a developer's salary. She assumed I was good with investments, and I let her believe that. I wanted her to love me for who I was, not what I owned. Life fell into a comfortable pattern. Every morning, Emma would kiss me goodbye, telling me not to spend all day debugging code, while I'd secretly head to my private elevator at Summit's headquarters. My assistant Janet was the only one who knew about my situation, and she'd gotten remarkably good at maintaining the illusion when Emma occasionally dropped by with lunch. I loved how Emma would come home excited about her latest achievements at work, never feeling overshadowed by what she thought was my modest career. She'd talk about her boss, Victoria Chen, a woman known in our industry for her ruthless business tactics. Victoria had been desperately trying to save Vertex from its declining market share, approaching larger tech firms for potential partnerships. What Emma didn't know was that my company had been considering acquiring Vertex for months. But the tech world is small, and I knew our carefully constructed reality couldn't last forever. Still, I never expected it to unravel quite like it did. Last Tuesday, Emma came home practically bouncing with excitement. Her eyes sparkled as she burst through the door, barely taking time to put down her bag. "Michael, you won't believe this," she exclaimed. "Victoria's invited us to dinner at Cascade Heights tomorrow night. She wants to meet you, says it's important to know her team's families." The knot in my stomach tightened instantly. Cascade Heights was where I regularly held board meetings. The staff all knew me as the CEO of Summit Technologies. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, I couldn't say no. "Sounds great," I said, forcing a smile. "What's the occasion?" Victoria mentioned something about a potential partnership with a major tech company. "This could be huge for my career, Michael." She hugged me tight, then pulled back with a slightly anxious look. "Just maybe wear something nice, not your usual coding clothes." If only she knew that what she called my coding clothes were what I chose to wear, not what I could afford. But I nodded, already wondering how this dinner would play out. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, everything would change, and Emma would learn the truth about who she really married. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about how to handle the situation at Cascade Heights. I could have called in sick, but that would only delay the inevitable. Besides, Emma had been working so hard for this opportunity, I couldn't take that away from her. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined different scenarios of how the evening might unfold, each one more uncomfortable than the last. The next day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls, though my mind was elsewhere. At the office, I had Janet clear my evening schedule and make sure the restaurant staff understood the delicacy of the situation. "Just treat me like any other guest," I instructed. Janet raised an eyebrow but nodded. She'd been my assistant for 10 years and knew better than to question my methods, though I could tell she disagreed with this whole charade. "You know, Michael," she said carefully, arranging some papers on her desk, "maybe it's time to tell her. Emma seems like she could handle it." I appreciated Janet's concern, but she didn't understand the whole picture. It wasn't just about Emma handling the truth. It was about preserving what we had, this genuine connection untainted by wealth and status. Emma texted me throughout the day, her excitement palpable even through messages. "Can't wait for tonight." And, "Don't forget to leave work early. We need you looking sharp." Each message made my stomach twist a little more. I smiled at my phone, wondering if she'd still be this excited once she knew the truth. Would she be angry? Hurt? Would she understand why I'd kept this secret? Around 4, I made my way down to the parking garage through the back entrance, something I rarely did. Usually, I left through the lobby, where everyone knew me as the CEO. Today, I couldn't risk running into any of Emma's colleagues who might be visiting our building for partnership discussions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, sneaking around my own company like an imposter. At home, Emma had laid out one of my nicer suits, a charcoal grey number she'd bought me for Christmas, thinking it was a splurge on her salary. Little did she know I had a closet full of bespoke suits in my private office, each one worth more than what she thought I made in a month. I put on the suit anyway, appreciating the love and thought she'd put into choosing it. While I was adjusting my tie, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Who was I really? The casual software developer Emma thought she'd married, or the powerful CEO I'd become? Sometimes I wasn't sure anymore. The lines between these two versions of myself had started to blur. When Emma emerged from our bedroom, she looked stunning in a deep blue dress that highlighted her eyes. She'd clearly put extra effort into her appearance tonight, her hair elegantly styled and her makeup perfect. She fussed with my tie, trying to get it just right, and I could feel the nervous energy radiating from her. "Victoria's really impressed by success," she said, smoothing my lapels. "I want her to see that you're not just, well, you know." Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted my collar. "Not just what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Part of me wanted to hear her say it, to understand exactly how she saw me. "Not just another programmer," she said quickly, avoiding my eyes. "You're so much more than that, even if your job title doesn't show it. You're smart and talented, and if Victoria just gives you a chance to talk about your work—" She trailed off, and I could hear the mixture of love and embarrassment in her voice. Her words stung more than they should have. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd chosen to keep my position secret, but hearing her try to make me sound more impressive than what she thought I was, it hit differently. Every word of praise was wrapped in an apology for what she perceived as my modest status. We arrived at Cascade Heights 15 minutes early. Emma insisted. Apparently, Victoria valued punctuality above all else. As we walked through the familiar brass doors, I saw recognition flash across the maitre d's face. Before he could speak, I gave him a subtle shake of my head. He recovered quickly, though I could see the confusion in his eyes. "Good evening," he said smoothly, glancing between Emma and me. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, we're here with Victoria Chen's party," Emma replied, her voice carrying a hint of pride mixed with nervousness. "Of course, Ms. Chen hasn't arrived yet, but please follow me." As we were led to our table, I noticed the usual staff watching us with poorly concealed interest. They were used to seeing me here during power lunches and board meetings, commanding respect with every gesture. Now they watched as I played the role of a simple software developer led to someone else's table. The weight of their stares made my collar feel tight. Emma squeezed my hand as we sat down. "Nervous?" she asked, mistaking my tension for anxiety about meeting her boss. "A little," I admitted, though not for the reasons she imagined. I was nervous about what this evening would reveal, not just about me, but about us, about how Emma really saw me, and about whether our relationship could survive the truth. The next few minutes were a countdown to what I knew would be an interesting evening. I just hadn't realized how interesting it would become, or how much it would test everything Emma and I had built together. Victoria Chen arrived exactly on time, making an entrance like she owned the place. She was shorter than I'd expected, but her presence filled the room. I'd seen her in business magazines and across negotiating tables, though she'd never met me in person. Our companies had conducted most discussions through intermediaries until now. She wore a crisp white suit that probably cost more than what she thought I made in 3 months. Behind her trailed 2 other executives from Vertex, both wearing carefully crafted expressions of importance. I recognized them from our market research: James Porter, their CFO, and Sarah Martinez, head of strategic partnerships. "Emma, darling," Victoria's voice carried across the restaurant as she approached our table. Her smile was practiced, professional, the kind I'd seen countless times in boardrooms. She air-kissed Emma's cheeks before turning her calculating gaze to me. "And this must be the husband I've heard so much about." Emma practically jumped to make introductions. "Yes!" "Victoria, this is Michael, my husband. He's a software developer at Summit Technologies." The way she rushed through my job title made my chest tighten. "Michael, this is Victoria Chen, my boss and the CEO of Vertex Dynamics." I stood and shook Victoria's hand, maintaining the perfect balance of firmness and deference that I'd expect from someone in my supposed position. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Chen. Emma speaks very highly of you." Victoria's grip was strong, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Please call me Victoria. We're all family here." She gestured to her colleagues. "James, Sarah, come meet Emma's better half." As we all sat down, I could feel the subtle shift in dynamics. Victoria took the head of the table, my usual spot when I dined here. The others arranged themselves according to their perceived importance, with Emma and me ending up near the far end. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "I hope you don't mind," Victoria said, signaling the sommelier, "but I took the liberty of pre-ordering some wine. They have an excellent Bordeaux here." She smiled at me condescendingly. "Though perhaps you're more of a beer person." Emma jumped in before I could respond. Oh, Michael actually knows quite a bit about wine. He's very good with his computer salary. She laughed nervously, and I saw the slight flush of embarrassment colour her cheeks. The sommelier approached with the wine, and I recognized him immediately. Pierre had served me countless times during business dinners. I saw the moment of recognition in his eyes, followed by confusion as he looked between Victoria and me. I gave him a subtle shake of my head. "Ah, yes," Pierre said, recovering smoothly. "The 2015 Chateau Margaux. An excellent choice." He began the wine service, and I watched Victoria's face as she prepared to perform the tasting ritual. "I can handle that," I offered, keeping my voice modest, "if you don't mind." Victoria raised an eyebrow, but gestured for Pierre to pour my taste. I could see Emma tense beside me. She was probably worried I'd embarrass her. I took the glass, going through the motions I'd performed hundreds of times in this very restaurant. The bouquet was familiar. I had several bottles of the same vintage in my private cellar. "Notes of blackberry and tobacco," I said quietly, taking a sip, "with hints of vanilla and truffle. It's drinking beautifully now, though it might be even better in another 5 years." I nodded to Pierre. "It's perfect, thank you." The surprise on Victoria's face was subtle but clear. James and Sarah exchanged glances, while Emma stared at me with a mixture of pride and confusion. I'd never shown this level of wine knowledge around her. It hadn't seemed important. "Well," Victoria said, recovering quickly, "it seems Emma's developer has hidden depths. Tell me, Michael, where did you learn about wine?" "Here and there," I replied vaguely. "You pick things up over time." The conversation shifted as we ordered our meals, but I could feel Victoria studying me. She was known for her ability to read people. It had made her successful in business negotiations. Now she was trying to figure out why something about me didn't quite add up to her understanding of a simple software developer. As the appetizers arrived, Victoria dominated the conversation, steering it toward business matters. She spoke about Vertex's recent projects, their market position, and their plans for expansion. I knew most of what she was saying was exaggerated. Our market analysts had painted a much bleaker picture of Vertex's situation. "Of course," Victoria said, delicately wiping her mouth. "We're in talks with several major tech companies about potential partnerships. It's all very exciting." She glanced at me with barely concealed condescension. "Though I'm sure that's all a bit over your head, Michael. How is the coding going at Summit?" Emma shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Michael's actually working on some important projects," she interjected, trying to make my supposed position sound more impressive. He's very good at what he does." "I'm sure he is." Victoria smiled, her tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "It must be challenging being married to someone in such a different professional sphere, Emma. But I've always admired your ability to see potential in unexpected places." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. I watched Emma's face fall slightly, even as she tried to maintain her professional smile. This wasn't just about me anymore. Victoria was subtly undermining Emma's judgment, suggesting that her choice in a husband somehow reflected poorly on her professional capabilities. "Actually," James chimed in, swirling his wineglass, "Summit Technologies has been making some interesting moves lately. There are rumors they're looking to acquire smaller firms." He looked at me with mild curiosity. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Michael?" I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was smiling. I'd personally approved those acquisition plans just last week. "Oh, you know how it is in tech companies," I said carefully. "Rumors are always flying around. I just focus on my coding." Victoria laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Well, I suppose that's all you can do at your level. Though, Emma dear, you should keep your ears open about these things. Summit's CEO. Now there's someone who understands business. unlike some of these other tech companies run by people who clearly don't deserve their positions. The irony was almost painful. I'd been voted CEO of the Year by 3 different business magazines, but here was Victoria Chen, dismissing my capabilities while having no idea who I was. Emma touched my arm gently. "Michael's very good at what he does," she repeated, but her voice was smaller now, less convinced. "He's been with Summit for years." "Yes, yes," Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure he's a perfectly adequate programmer. But Emma, we're talking about real business here, strategic partnerships, market dynamics, things that actually matter in our world." I watched as Emma's shoulders slumped slightly. She'd been so proud earlier, so excited about this dinner. Now she was shrinking into herself, trying to become invisible as her boss continued to belittle her husband and, by extension, her judgment. Sarah Martinez, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. "Speaking of Summit, I heard their CEO is quite the mystery man. Barely any public appearances, no social media presence. Some say he's brilliant, others think he's just lucky." "Probably some trust fund kid who got lucky," Victoria scoffed. "These tech companies, they're all the same. Men in hoodies thinking they can run billion-dollar businesses." She looked at me with what seemed like pity. "No offense, Michael. I'm sure you're very comfortable in your position." The situation was becoming almost comical. Here was Victoria Chen, desperately trying to secure a partnership with my company, while unknowingly insulting me to my face. But what hurt most was watching Emma, seeing her confidence crumble as she tried to navigate between her boss's disdain and her loyalty to me. The main course arrived, each plate a work of art that I'd approved on the menu months ago. Victoria took one bite of her Wagyu beef and launched into a story about her recent business trip to Tokyo. I noticed how she kept directing her conversation primarily to James and Sarah, occasionally including Emma, but largely ignoring me. Except when she wanted to make a point about corporate hierarchy. "You know," Victoria said, cutting into her steak with practiced precision, "Summit Technologies has been surprisingly resistant to our partnership overtures. Their CEO must be either incredibly arrogant or remarkably short-sighted." She glanced at me with fake sympathy. "Though I suppose you wouldn't know anything about those discussions, would you, Michael?" I took a sip of wine, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes things aren't quite what they seem from the outside." "Oh, sweetie," Emma jumped in, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "Victoria's talking about high-level corporate strategy. It's a bit different from coding." She patted my hand condescendingly, trying to smooth over what she thought was my naive comment. The patronizing tone in my wife's voice hit harder than any of Victoria's barbs. I'd heard Emma defend me all evening, but now she was apologizing for me, trying to minimize my presence to maintain her standing with her boss. It was a side of her I'd never seen before, and it made me question everything. "Actually," James interjected, "I heard Summit's CEO is quite methodical. They say he likes to understand every aspect of a potential deal before making moves." He looked at me curiously. "You must see him around the office sometimes, Michael." "What's he like?" Emma answered before I could. "Oh, Michael works remotely most days. He's never really in the main offices." Another little lie to cover what she perceived as my lesser status. "But he's very happy in his position, aren't you, dear?" Victoria smirked. "Well, not everyone can be at the top. Some people are just more suited to supporting roles." She turned to Emma. "Speaking of which, I've been meaning to discuss your future at Vertex. With this potential partnership on the horizon, we'll need people who truly understand corporate leadership." I watched Emma's eyes light up with hope, and something in me snapped. Not because of Victoria's thinly veiled manipulations, but because of how easily Emma was falling for them, how readily she was dismissing me to climb Victoria's corporate ladder. It's interesting you mention corporate leadership, I said, my voice level but firm. I've always believed true leadership isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about understanding every level of your business from the ground up. Victoria's eyebrows shot up. Oh, and what would a programmer know about corporate leadership? You'd be surprised, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. For instance, I know that Vertex's market share has dropped 15% in the last quarter. Your cloud computing division is hemorrhaging clients to more innovative competitors, and your attempt to pivot to AI services has been hampered by outdated infrastructure. The table fell silent. Emma stared at me, mortified, while Victoria's face flushed red. "How dare you?" she began, but I wasn't finished. "I also know that your aggressive pursuit of partnerships isn't about expansion. It's about survival. Vertex needs a lifeline, and you're hoping Summit Technologies will be it." I leaned back in my chair, letting my words sink in. Though I have to say, insulting the CEO of the company you're trying to partner with might not be the best strategy. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Victoria's face had lost all colour, while James and Sarah exchanged panicked glances. Emma sat frozen beside me, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. I could see the gears turning in Victoria's head as she processed what I'd just implied. "What exactly are you saying?" Victoria's voice had lost its condescending edge, replaced by a tremor of uncertainty. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my Summit Technologies ID badge, the real one, not the developer badge I usually carried. I placed it on the table, CEO credentials facing up. "I'm saying that, while I do enjoy coding, it's not my primary responsibility at Summit. I'm Michael Thompson, CEO and founder." Emma's wine glass slipped from her hand, spilling red across the white tablecloth. The sound of breaking glass seemed to snap everyone out of their shock. Sarah quickly dabbed at the spill with her napkin, while James looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. This is impossible," Victoria stammered. "We've never met." "Because I prefer to understand companies thoroughly before considering partnerships," I finished for her, "including how their leadership treats people they consider beneath them." Emma finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Michael, all this time?" I turned to my wife, seeing hurt and confusion war in her eyes. "I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I own. When we met, I'd just seen another relationship fall apart because she was more interested in my position than in me. With you, everything was different. Real." "Real?" Emma's voice cracked. "You've been lying to me for our entire relationship." Victoria, recovering some of her composure, tried to salvage the situation. "Michael, Mr. Thompson, I assure you my earlier comments were merely an honest reflection of how you view people." I cut her off. "How you encourage your employees to value status over substance. I've watched all evening as you systematically tried to make my wife ashamed of her husband, to use her embarrassment of me as leverage for her career advancement." I stood up, adjusting my jacket. "As for the partnership discussions, I think tonight has been very illuminating. Summit Technologies values integrity and respect at all levels. I'm not seeing that at Vertex." "Please," Victoria's voice had taken on a desperate edge. "We can discuss this. My office will be in touch regarding the termination of partnership discussions," I said firmly. Then I turned to Emma, whose eyes were brimming with tears. "I'll have the car brought around. Take all the time you need." As I walked away from the table, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Victoria was desperately trying to recover, James was making excuses, and Sarah was already on her phone, likely warning their board about what had just happened. But all I could focus on was the look in Emma's eyes, a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite read. The maitre d' appeared at my elbow. "Your usual car, Mr. Thompson." "Yes, please." And have it wait for Mrs. Thompson. I'll take a separate car home." I paused, then added, "And Pierre? The bill for the evening goes to my personal account." As I waited in the lobby, I could see my reflection in the polished marble walls. I still looked the same, the man Emma had fallen in love with, but tonight had changed everything. I just hoped that once the shock wore off, she would understand why I'd kept this secret, and that the love we shared was more real because of it, not less. The drive home felt longer than usual. I'd taken a different car, leaving our regular driver to wait for Emma. The city lights blurred past my window as I replayed the evening's events in my mind. Every forced smile, every apologetic glance, every moment Emma had tried to make excuses for what she thought was my modest position. It all felt different now. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from Victoria, desperate attempts to salvage what she now realized was a catastrophic business dinner. Emails from James and Sarah, probably trying to distance themselves from their boss's behavior. I ignored them all. The only message I was waiting for wouldn't come until Emma was ready. When I reached our lake house, I didn't go inside. Instead, I walked down to the private dock where Emma and I often spent our evenings. The moon reflected off the water, creating patterns that seemed to mock the chaos I'd created. I loosened my tie, the one Emma had so carefully adjusted just hours ago, and sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling above the water. Janet called once. "The board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Should I tell them about tonight?" "No," I replied. "I'll handle it, but reschedule all my morning meetings. I have a feeling I'll need time with Emma." "For what it's worth," Janet added softly, "I think you did the right thing, both in keeping it quiet and in revealing it tonight." I wasn't so sure. The look in Emma's eyes kept haunting me, not just the shock or the hurt, but the confusion, like she was questioning every moment we'd shared, every conversation we'd had, every decision we'd made together. The sound of tires on gravel caught my attention. Emma's car had arrived. I stayed where I was, giving her space to decide how she wanted to handle this. The car door slammed, followed by the click of her heels on the wooden dock. She stopped a few feet behind me. 3 years, she said, her voice tight with emotion. 3 years of marriage. And I never knew who you really were. "You knew exactly who I was," I responded quietly. "The only thing you didn't know was my job title." "My job title?" Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're not just some team lead or project manager, Michael. You're the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country. Do you have any idea how stupid I felt tonight, sitting there, making excuses for my husband's simple job, while Victoria Chen—" Her voice cracked. I turned to face her. She'd been crying, her makeup slightly smudged, but she stood tall, arms crossed protectively across her chest. The blue dress that had looked so perfect earlier now seemed like a costume from a play where neither of us knew our real roles. "Every time I defended you," she continued, "every time I tried to make your job sound more important, you must have been laughing inside. Poor, naive Emma, trying to protect her husband's dignity while he secretly runs the company that could buy her entire workplace without blinking." "I never laughed at you," I said firmly, "and I never wanted you to defend me. That's partly why I kept it quiet. I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I own or what position I hold." "Who you are." Emma's voice rose slightly. "How can I know who you are when everything about our life together has been built on a lie? This house, I always wondered how we could afford it on a developer's salary. Your coding clothes that probably cost more than I make in a month. All those times I brought you lunch at work, thinking I was surprising my hard-working programmer husband." "Janet always texted me when you were coming," I admitted quietly. I'd leave my office and go to the developer floor. Those lunches meant everything to me, Emma. They were real. Real. She walked to the edge of the dock, standing just out of reach. Do you know what was real? Me, sitting at that table tonight, watching Victoria Chen tear down my husband while I tried desperately to defend you. Feeling ashamed because I couldn't stand up to her properly without risking my career. That was real, Michael. That humiliation was real. The pain in her voice cut deep. I never meant for you to feel humiliated. But I did. She turned to face me, tears streaming freely now. And the worst part? You sat there and watched it happen. You let me apologize for you, make excuses for you, while all along you could have ended it with a single word. Would you have preferred that? I asked. For me to reveal everything in front of Victoria, just to save you from a moment of discomfort, to prove that your husband wasn't actually beneath her after all? That's not fair. Isn't it? Emma, I saw how you changed around her, how desperate you were for her approval. The woman spent the entire evening belittling someone she thought was beneath her, and instead of standing up to that behavior, you played along. She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. That's not... I was trying to protect you. No, I said gently. You were trying to protect yourself. From the moment we sat down, you were apologizing for me, trying to make me seem more impressive than what you thought I was. Not because you were proud of who I am, but because you were afraid of how my perceived status reflected on you. Emma sank down onto one of the dock chairs, her shoulders shaking. How can you say that? I've always been proud of you. Have you? Tonight, every time Victoria made a condescending remark about my job, you jumped in to make excuses. Not to challenge her behavior, but to minimize me, to make it clear that you knew your husband was beneath her, but please don't hold it against you. That's not what I was doing, she whispered, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Emma, I kept my position secret because I wanted our relationship to be based on who we are, not what we do or what we own. But tonight showed me something else too. It showed me how quickly principles can crumble under the pressure of power and status. She looked up at me, her makeup streaked with tears. So this was all some kind of test? To see if I was worthy of the great CEO's trust? No. I moved closer, kneeling in front of her chair. It was me trying to hold on to something real in a world where everything is about position and power. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe by trying to protect what we had, I ended up destroying it. A long silence fell between us, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the dock. Emma's tears had stopped, but her hands were trembling as she twisted her wedding ring, the simple band I'd chosen instead of the extravagant one I could have afforded. Why didn't you tell me after we were married? She finally asked. When you knew I loved you for you. I sat back on my heels, considering her question. At first, it was because I wanted to be sure. Then, as time went on, it became harder to find the right moment. How do you tell your wife that everything she thinks she knows about your life is only part of the story? So you just let me go on making a fool of myself. All those times I worried about our finances, planned our budgets, felt guilty about buying expensive things. She shook her head. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? About as foolish as I felt watching my wife apologize for me all evening. The words came out sharper than I intended. Emma, I saw a side of you tonight I've never seen before. The way you deferred to Victoria, the way you were willing to diminish me, to elevate yourself in her eyes, that wasn't the woman I married. That's not fair, she protested. I was trying to navigate a complicated situation. No, you were trying to please someone who takes pleasure in making others feel small. The Emma I know would have stood up against that kind of behavior, not participated in it. She stood up abruptly, pacing the dock. "You don't get to judge my behavior when you've been lying to me for years. Do you know what Victoria will do now? My career at Vertex is over." "Is that what you're really worried about? Your position at a company that treats people like they're worthless unless they have the right title?" "Don't you dare!" She spun to face me. "Don't you dare act superior about this. You, with your secret identity and your millions, playing at being ordinary while watching me struggle with everyday decisions. Was it fun, watching me clip coupons while you could have bought the whole store?" I rose to my feet. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you. Look how quickly this becomes about money and position. The woman I fell in love with cared about people, not power. She would have stood up to Victoria's bullying regardless of who I was." "The woman you fell in love with?" Emma laughed bitterly. "You mean the woman you deceived? The woman you married under false pretenses? Tell me, Michael, was anything real? Or was this all just an elaborate experiment to see how the other half lives?" Her words hit hard because they revealed how little she understood my motivations. "Everything was real, Emma. Every moment, every laugh, every decision we made together. That was all real. The only thing that wasn't real was the assumption you made about my job title." "An assumption you let me make," Emma countered, her voice low and hurt. "Every day for 3 years you watched me make that assumption. Every time I worried about our future, every time I felt proud about getting a promotion and a raise that probably wouldn't even cover your lunch expenses for a month. Do you know how small that makes me feel now?" I moved closer to the water's edge, feeling the cool breeze off the lake. The moonlight cast long shadows across the dock, making the moment feel even more surreal. "When we first met, I'd just ended a relationship with someone who was more interested in my bank account than in me. She had our wedding planned before our 3rd date, all about showing off to Seattle's elite. The venue, the guest list, the press coverage. She'd already contacted wedding planners who specialized in CEO weddings. So I was what? Your experiment in dating someone normal?" The bitterness in her voice was painful to hear. "Your little adventure in seeing how the other half lives. I bet you got a good laugh every time I worried about our mortgage payments." "No, Emma, you were real. That day in the coffee shop when I spilled coffee on your suit and you laughed instead of getting angry, that was real. The way you light up when talking about your projects, how you care about your team members as people, not resources, that's real. At least it was until tonight. Until Victoria Chen walked into our lives, and suddenly my wife became someone I barely recognized." She flinched, her hands clenching into fists. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I watched you become a different person around Victoria, someone who would rather apologize for her husband than stand up to a bully. The Emma I married would never have let anyone treat people that way, regardless of their position. You used to tell me stories about standing up to managers who mistreated their teams, about fighting for your junior employees' rights. What happened to that, Emma?" "Oh, that's rich coming from you," she shot back, her voice rising with emotion. "You talk about authenticity while running a multi-billion-dollar company in secret. Do you have any idea how many of my career decisions were influenced by thinking we needed the money? The promotions I chased, the extra hours I worked, the networking events I attended, all because I thought we were building a future together. I turned down a job I loved in non-profit tech education because it didn't pay enough. I stopped volunteering at the coding boot camp for underprivileged kids because I needed overtime hours. Every single choice I made was based on a lie. We were building a future together, I insisted, my own frustration finally breaking through. Money doesn't change who we are as people, Emma. At least it shouldn't. Those choices you made, they showed your character, your determination, your strength. That's what I fell in love with. But it does change things, Michael. It changes everything. She began pacing the dock, her heels clicking against the wooden planks. All those times I felt guilty about wanting a vacation or a new car or... She paused, her voice breaking. or starting a family because I wasn't sure we were financially ready. Do you know how many nights I lay awake, wondering if we could afford a baby, if it was fair to bring a child into a world where we might struggle to provide the best opportunities? That hit me hard. We talked about children, but Emma had always said she wanted to be more established in her career first. I'd never imagined she was carrying this burden alone. You never told me that was about money. Because I thought I needed to be the responsible one. The words burst out of her like she'd been holding them back forever. I thought I needed to make sure we could provide the best life possible for our children. Meanwhile, you were sitting on a fortune, watching me make these sacrifices. Watching me put our dreams on hold because I was trying to be financially responsible. I stepped toward her, but she backed away, putting more distance between us. Her eyes glistened with tears in the moonlight, but her voice was steel. Every sacrifice you made, every decision you struggled with, those things shaped who you are, I said softly. Would you really have wanted me to just throw money at every problem, to remove every challenge from your path? Would that have made our relationship more real or less? That wasn't your decision to make, she whispered, and the quiet devastation in her voice was worse than any shouting. You took away my right to choose, to know the full truth about my own life, my own marriage. How can you talk about what's real when you've been living a lie? The wind picked up across the lake, rustling through the trees and sending small waves lapping against the dock. Emma stood there in her blue dress, arms wrapped around herself, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. The careful facade she'd maintained at dinner had crumbled completely. "Do you remember our first anniversary?" I asked quietly, trying to bridge the gulf between us. "When you insisted on cooking dinner instead of going out, because I thought we should save money," she said flatly. "Another decision based on a lie. Number, you said you wanted to cook because it meant more than any restaurant meal. You spent hours making that lasagna from scratch, using your grandmother's recipe. That night wasn't about money. It was about showing love through effort, about creating something meaningful together. Stop trying to romanticize your deception," she snapped, but her voice wavered. "You can't just cherry-pick sweet moments to justify lying to me for years. Every memory I have is now tainted by knowing you were pretending to be something you're not." I took out my wallet and removed a folded piece of paper, the grocery list she'd written for that anniversary dinner. The paper was worn at the creases, her handwriting still clear. Fresh basil, genuine Italian tomatoes, the specific cheese her grandmother had always used. I kept this because it reminded me of why I fell in love with you, not because you were trying to be frugal, but because you put so much thought and love into everything you do. Emma stared at the worn paper, her expression softening for a moment before hardening again. "And what about tonight? What about my career? You've humiliated Victoria, probably destroyed any chance of a partnership between our companies and exposed your secret. My position at Vertex is over. Was it worth it? Watching my wife compromise her values to please someone like Victoria? No, it wasn't worth it. I would rather lose 100 business deals than watch you become someone you're not. The Emma I know would never have laughed at someone being belittled, no matter what their job was." "That's easy for you to say from your position of power," she countered bitterly. "You've never had to navigate office politics or worry about job security. You've never had to smile and nod while your boss belittles someone you love. You were playing a role, Michael. I was trying to survive." "Haven't I?" I asked quietly. "I've spent 3 years watching people dismiss me, make assumptions about my capabilities, treat me as somehow less worthy of respect, including you tonight. Every time someone assumed I couldn't understand complex business matters, every time they talked down to me or ignored my input, I felt it all. The only difference is that I chose it." "That's different," she insisted, but her voice held less conviction. Is it? I chose to let people see me without the trappings of power because it showed me who they really were. And until tonight, you were the one person who always saw me as worthy of respect, regardless of my perceived position. Or at least, I thought you did. Emma sank back into the dock chair, all the fight seeming to drain out of her. The moonlight caught the tears on her cheeks as she stared out across the water. I don't know who either of us really is anymore. Everything I thought I knew about our life together feels like a carefully constructed illusion. How can I trust anything when our entire relationship was built on a fundamental lie? Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of betrayal and lost trust. The gentle sounds of the lake at night seemed to mock the turmoil between us, its peaceful surface hiding deeper currents, just like our marriage had been hiding deeper truths all along. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of water against wood. Emma sat in the chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, while I remained standing, unsure whether to move closer or maintain this painful distance. The dock creaked softly beneath my feet, a rhythmic reminder of the unstable ground we now stood on. Our entire life together, every shared moment, every dream, every quiet conversation now felt like it was suspended between what was and what could be. "I've already drafted my resignation letter," Emma said suddenly, her voice hollow. "I can't go back to Vertex after this. Victoria would never let me forget what happened tonight. You don't have to resign. I could—" "What? Use your power as CEO to protect me?" She laughed bitterly, a sound so unlike her usual warm laugh that it cut through me. "That's exactly what I don't want. I've worked my entire career to earn everything on my own merit. I won't start taking handouts now, even from my husband." I studied her face in the moonlight, seeing the same determination that had first drawn me to her. The woman who had challenged a senior manager's flawed project proposal during our first company team-building event. The woman who had negotiated her way to a promotion by presenting a comprehensive market analysis that left her colleagues speechless. The woman who had always defined herself by her achievements, not by who she was married to. "That's one of the things I love about you, you know," I said softly. "Your integrity, your drive to succeed on your own terms. It's why I never wanted to tell you about my position." "And yet you took away my ability to make informed decisions about our life together," she countered, but her voice had lost some of its edge. The anger was giving way to something more complex, a mixture of hurt, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. All those times I thought we were building something together, as equals. I remembered all the moments she didn't know about, the times I could have solved her professional challenges with a single phone call, the career obstacles I watched her navigate entirely on her own. Each struggle had made her stronger, more resilient. Each challenge had been a testament to her capabilities. We were equals, Emma. Money doesn't change that. Everything we built together, our home, our relationship, our trust, that was real. Was it? She stood up, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. The designer dress she'd saved for months to afford, believing every professional achievement needed to be marked by something tangible. Because right now, I feel like I've been living in a story where I didn't know the plot, where my husband was playing a role and I was just comic relief. The naive wife who didn't know she was married to a billionaire. I thought about our first date, how she'd insisted on splitting the bill at a modest cafe, how she'd talked about her dreams of building something meaningful in her career. I'd been wearing a watch worth more than most people's annual salary, and she hadn't noticed or cared about any of that. I stepped closer, and this time she didn't back away. "You were never comic relief, Emma. You were the whole story. Every decision I made, including keeping my position secret, was because I wanted what we had to be real. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have trusted you with the truth sooner. but I never meant to hurt you." The moonlight cast long shadows across the dock, creating an almost surreal landscape around us. It felt like we were suspended in a moment between our past and an uncertain future. She looked up at me, tears glistening in her eyes. "I believe you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. And now I don't know how to trust anything. How do we move forward from here?" I reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. Her hand was cold, her fingers slightly stiff, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance between us. "We start over," I said softly. "No more secrets, no more pretending. Just us, being honest about who we are and what we want. And maybe we find out that the people we fell in love with are still there, underneath all of this." Emma's fingers tightened around mine slightly, a microscopic sign of connection. "It won't be that simple." "No," I agreed. "But nothing worth having ever is. You taught me that, actually, with your grandmother's lasagna recipe." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The first hint of the woman I knew was still somewhere beneath the layers of hurt and betrayal. "That was a disaster the first 3 times I tried it. But you kept at it until you got it right, because that's who you are, Emma. You don't give up on things that matter." She was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the lake. The water reflected the emerging stars, a canvas of potential and possibility. Finally, she turned back to me. "I can't promise I'll get past this quickly. I need time to process everything, to figure out who we are now." "I understand, and I'll give you all the time you need. Just don't give up on us yet." Emma looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me. Her eyes, usually so bright and decisive, now held a vulnerability I'd never seen before. "I won't," she whispered. "But no more secrets, Michael, not even the ones you think are protecting me." "No more secrets," I promised. "From now on, everything I am, good and bad, CEO and husband, it's all yours to know." As we stood there on the dock, the first light of dawn began to paint the sky. Soft pinks and blues emerged, pushing back the darkness, a metaphor too perfect to be anything but real. Whatever came next wouldn't be easy, but at least now we were starting from a place of truth. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to help us find our way back to each other. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.